Live from London, this is BBC News. Donald Trump dismisses the sexual abuse verdict, mocks his accuser in a fiery TV interview and hints at potential pardons for the Capitol rioters. The US braces for a border security crisis as the Trump era Title 42 pandemic restriction expires. Pakistan's army issues a stern warning as deadly clashes continue over the arrest of the former Prime Minister Imran Khan. Deadly floods devastate remote villages in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Over 400 people have died and thousands missing in its worst natural disaster in recent history. And from an Essex backing singer to an Australian lawyer, we'll bring you some of the diverse acts from the last 16 countries competing in tonight's Eurovision second semi-final. Hello, I'm Frankie McCamley. A day after he was found liable by a New York jury for sexual abuse and defamation, Donald Trump has faced questions in a live town hall in the US state of New Hampshire. The frontrunner for the 2024 Republican nomination for the presidency demeaned his accuser, E. Jean Carroll. He reiterated his position that the 2020 election was rigged, and if he returned to the White House, Mr. Trump said he would pardon many of his supporters who had been jailed for taking part in the January 6th attack on the US Capitol. This is his response to a question about the E. Jean Carroll verdict. Thank you very much. Our correspondent Barbara Plett-Usher reporting there. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News.
The news never sleeps, even when you do. A ceasefire is being called. A president is being overthrown. And trials of a new cancer drug show promise. But rest, knowing you can catch up in your own time. The Global News Podcast brings you the stories you need to hear every day. Listen wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
You're live with BBC News. To Africa now, where at least 400 people have died following floods in a remote mountainous area of the Democratic Republic of Congo. A search and rescue operation is continuing for thousands of people who remain missing after riverside villages in the east of the country were destroyed. It's the Congo's deadliest natural disaster in recent history. Well, now live now to our correspondent Joel Kiriungi, who is following the story from Nairobi. And just talk us through what we know so far. Of course, this is an evolving situation. And now, before we go, we need to show you these pictures. Dog lovers in San Diego have been entertaining their pampered pooches at a prom, can you believe it? Usually the highlight of the high school calendar. It was the turn of these furry friends to enjoy a night of entertainment. All of the dogs had been found homes from this animal rescue centre in the city, and it was an occasion to let their fur down. And keeping in prom tradition, they even elected a prom king and queen. Of course they did. Well, stay with us here on BBC News.
Now on BBC News, your daily briefing on business and economics from the world's financial centres. From new broadcasting house in London, World Business Report.
Live from London, this is BBC News. Donald Trump calls for Republicans to let the US default on its debts rather than give way on Biden's spending plans. With AI rapidly evolving, the European Parliament decides later on a strict and wide-ranging AI Act. Also to come, stream of cost consciousness. Disney Plus is losing less money, but 4 million more subscribers pull the plug. And a Ferrari without the roar, the drive to electric means a difficult road for the supercar maker. Can it hold on to its heart and soul? We'll be hearing from the boss. If you've just joined us, I'm Sally Bundock, and we're looking at the top stories in business now, beginning with Donald Trump, who has called on Republican representatives to stand firm on the US debt ceiling, playing down risks to the US economy and arguing that the Democrats should agree to massive spending cuts. Speaking at a CNN town hall event, he dismissed US Treasury warnings of a catastrophic risk to the global economy of a default on its debt, saying instead that it might just lead to a bad week or even just a bad day. He said, who knows? Responding in Japan, just a short time ago, the US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said Republicans and Democrats must resolve their differences because an economic catastrophe is the only possible outcome if the debt ceiling is not raised. Michelle Fleury there, around the world and across the UK. This is BBC News.
When the weather can't make up its mind. We can help you make up yours. Check on BBC Weather.
You're live with BBC News, continuing with our business coverage and now looking at the world's second biggest economy, where consumer prices have risen at the slowest pace for 2 years in April, with a year-on-year rise of just 0.2% for China. So it's a clear contrast with the surging prices we're seeing elsewhere around the world. It suggests more needs to be done to restabilise the world's number 2 economy after it was in the COVID slump. Many restrictions were lifted around the turn of the year, but there's still some way to go before internal demand picks up a pace. Let's talk to Duncan Wrigley, Chief China Economist at Pantheon Macroeconomics. Good to see you, Duncan. So there were retail sales numbers as well. There was quite a bit of data coming out. What picture does it paint about China? There you have it, the promise from Ferrari. If you get an electric vehicle from them, it will be unique. Now let's look at financial markets in Asia. These markets were reacting to the inflation numbers out in the United States, which happened, of course, the day before and was showing that inflation is coming down. So fairly benign in Asia today. Just to mention that Apple supplier Foxconn has come out with its earnings as well, reporting a 56% fall in first quarter net profits, partly as global economic woes hurt demand for smart consumer electronics. That's how Wall Street ended their day. Again, we had Disney's results, which we've mentioned. We're really in the middle of all the earnings stories coming through, and investors are digesting all the earnings reports to just read between the lines to see how some of corporate America's main players are faring amidst this concern about a possible recession in the US and what's ahead. We'll bring you the news from the Bank of England here on BBC News later. But for now, from me, it's goodbye.
Live from London, this is BBC News. Trump unapologetic as he mocks the woman who won her civil suit against him for defamation and sexual abuse. Upbeat and optimistic, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says his country is on course for his planned counter-offensive in an exclusive BBC interview.
Mentally, we're ready. In terms of how motivated our military are, we're ready. In terms of enough personnel in our brigades, we're ready. In terms of equipment, not everything has arrived yet.
Pakistan's army issues a stern warning as deadly clashes continue over the arrest of the former Prime Minister Imran Khan. And Eurovision fever heats up. 16 countries take to the stage in Liverpool later for the second semi-final. Hello, I'm Frankie McCamley. A day after he was found liable by a New York jury for sexual abuse and defamation, Donald Trump has faced questions in a live town hall in the US state of New Hampshire. The frontrunner for the 2024 Republican nomination for the presidency demeaned his accuser, E. Jean Carroll. He reiterated his position the 2020 election was rigged, and if he returned to the White House, Mr. Trump said he would pardon many of his supporters who've been jailed for taking part in the January 6th attack on the US Capitol. This is his response to a question about the E. Jean Carroll verdict. Thank you very much, Hugo Bachego, reporting live from Kyiv. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. You're live with BBC News. Israel has launched airstrikes on Gaza, killing 3 Palestinians, including a commander of the Islamic Jihad militant group. The group says the airstrike killed the head of its rocket launching unit. It's the 3rd day of Israeli airstrikes on Gaza. On Wednesday, militants in Gaza fired more than 500 rockets at Israel. 25 people have been killed in Gaza since Tuesday morning. Well, live now to Jerusalem, and our Middle East correspondent Tom Bateman is there for us. And Tom, just bring us up to date with what we know so far. Now, before we go, we have to show you some of these pictures of dog lovers in San Diego. They've been entertaining their pampered pooches at a prom, can you believe it? Usually the highlight of the high school calendar, it was the turn of these furry friends to enjoy a night of entertainment. All the dogs have been found homes from this animal rescue centre. And in keeping with prom tradition, there was even a prom king and queen. You're watching BBC News.
Hello there. There is a lot of weather happening across Europe at the moment, and most of it contrasting